Hey, do you have a problem killing? Why, yes, I do. Well, I've got just the thing for you.
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
Hey, this is Phil, and you can consider me to be a video game newbie.
I'm Andy Hunter, a longtime gamer, also a longtime sequestered for the most part in my Nintendo corner.
I'm Kate, and I hope you like puns surrounding gross and man, because that's what you can look forward to.
Thank you for joining me, and a bigger thank you because we are finally, a month late celebrating our 2-year anniversary of doing this show.
Yeah.
Whoa!
So thank you again for indulging my neuroses by being a part of this. It's been very, very fun taking this journey with you. I know I've learned a lot.
And you're changing the world, Kevin. Since you started this podcast, there haven't been any video game related controversies.
We put a lid on them. We finally bottled them up. And let's just take credit for killing crypto. Let's just say we did that.
Well, we did create some crypto along the way.
Yeah, we did. For the benefit of our listeners, as a very, very sweet birthday present, Andy and Phil gave me 2 actual Scandal coins that say on them Scandal coin, and they say everything related to crypto is a scam. And it's a very, very thoughtful gift. Again, here we are celebrating our 2-year anniversary. And as we did last year, where we did a deep dive into kind of a big topic, last time we did the creation of the Entertainment Software Ratings Board. And so in the spirit of that, in honor of 2 years of moral panics, insane advertising campaigns, any surprising/unsurprising amount of talk about fascism, today we're going to start a very deep dive into a figure that I've alluded to a bunch of times in previous episodes. Someone who I came to realize the more and more I researched is actually one of the most, if not the most influential figures in the public discourse over violent video games over the last 30 plus years. It's not Joe Lieberman. It's not Hillary Clinton. It's not even our old friend, Mr. Jack Thompson. So today, we are going to start a very, probably more detailed than you'd like look at someone more important and, in my opinion, more dangerous than all of them, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. What do you all know about Dave Grossman?
Literally nothing.
I think that I've heard his name in the context of, I believe it was called Killology, the mode of thought of training police officers that they should be ready and willing to take people's lives.
Yeah, that's the same thing that I had heard.
Yeah, that's pretty much the big thing everybody knows about Grossman. People who have heard the name Dave Grossman likely know it in reference to his current role as a police trainer/motivational speaker. And Grossman purports to be a what he calls killology expert, which is a field that he made up that he claims is the scientific study of why people kill. And he's parlayed this alleged experience into an influential and extremely financially lucrative career, telling America's cops why they should be ready, willing, and able to gun down anybody so much as looks at them funny.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think Killology was what Alan from Hatred majored in college. Is that right?
I only minored in Killology. I majored in women's studies. It's a bad joke. Why did I do that?
I like it. I think you can claim it works on a couple levels.
I majored in Killology, but I minored in Killology. Oh, fuck, it was the same thing. That was a waste of time.
I double majored in killology. I'm a super killologist. Everybody shut up. Leave me alone.
Yeah, Alan decided to go on his murderous rampage. He was 2 years into a graduate program in Killology, and it just burned him out. He was just done. That's what the whole thing was about with Hatred. Check out our previous episode on Hatred.
Publish or perish. I choose perish.
Grossman's a surprisingly large topic. I did not know how big of a topic he was when I started researching him. And it's safe to say it's the most ambitious subject we've ever tackled on the show. So much so that us covering him is going to be kind of like a mini series within the larger series of Scandalous Games. To the point that we're going to be doing about 6 months on Dave. To keep us sane, we're going to be doing this. We'll be 2 months on Grossman and 1 month off. So we'll do this month on Dave. We'll do next month on Dave. And then the month after that, we'll do something else and then go back to him, because I kind of want to keep us all. I don't want us to drive any crazier than I've already gone on researching this guy. And so by the end, I hope you'll come away understanding why we needed to devote so much attention to him, given both his influence on video game violence discourse in the United States and the militarization of America's police. And also to help us along the way, Andy has done a real solid for us, and to keep all of us sane, has opted to create a little game that's going to go at least for these first couple of episodes. Andy, you want to give us some insights on what we got to look forward to?
Sure, yeah. So, Kevin, you started a great tradition on this show that when we get into heavy topics where somebody needs a break, anybody can just without judgment say, "Get over here," in their best Scorpion impression from Mortal Kombat, and we'll do a little game. In this case, the game I have found on the internet is Pokemon or prescription medication. So I've got the names. I've got 20 names, and so at various points, honoring our previous series on Pokemon fan games. At various points when we need a break, I will read a name to you, and you can tell me if is it the name of a Pokemon or the name of a prescription drug.
Why don't we test it out then? Get over here.
All right, tell me, Pokemon or prescription medication? Excelgor.
So the gore makes me think monster, but the Excel makes me think of Excel.
My mind was also going to some sort of spreadsheet related pocket monster. I'm going to say Pokemon. I'm going to say this is a Pokemon.
All right.
This is tough, but I'm going to agree with Kevin and also go with Pokemon.
Can you say the name again?
Excelgor.
I agree. It's tough, but I'm gonna say Pokemon.
Correct. That is a Pokemon. So yes, Excelgor is a bug-type Pokemon introduced in Generation 5, Black and White. It evolves from the Pokemon Shelmet by trading. So what you in your game have to have the Pokemon Shelmet, and the other person you're trading with has to have a Carablast. And while they trade, the idea is one of the two bug-type Pokemon hands over its metal carapace to the other. So then Excelgor, doesn't have any steel type anymore, but is now very fast, where the Excel is an accelerate.
Oh.
I believe there will be some measure of me making up things, as I definitely don't do when I dispense legal advice on this podcast.
All right, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So why don't we dive into our topic? And before we go any further, I'm going to do a bit of self-sabotage and save you all probably way too many hours over the next several months and give you my overall thesis statement on Grossman right off the bat. Dave Grossman is a dangerous grifter who has spent the last 3 decades demonizing video games for causing violent behavior, while also helping escalate America's ongoing crisis over guns and encouraging America's police to revel in causing violent death and suffering and making himself a shit ton of money in the process. There we go. Period. Full stop. And that'll do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. See you in 3 months when we talk about Manhunt or whatever.
Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming.
So I felt like my brain was going to catch on fire right there. Could you say that again a little slower, please? I feel like that was important.
Sure. So Dave Grossman is a dangerous grifter who has spent the last 3 decades demonizing video games for causing violent behavior, while also helping escalate America's ongoing crisis over guns and encouraging America's police to revel in causing violent death and suffering and making himself a shit ton of money in the process. That's the overall message of the series. So if you're still here, buckle up, because I'm going to introduce you to Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. We'll address his journey into becoming a self-proclaimed Killology expert. And to do so, we'll take a closer look at his most influential work, the 1995 book On Killing, which will give us a sense of both Grossman's thoughts on video games as well as his personal style of punditry. This will then lay the foundation for a larger analysis of his ongoing campaign against video games and how he may be the most influential person in the history of the panic over violent video games. So with all the way, how are we all doing at the start?
I'm ready to go. God help us all.
I am also ready to go.
Good as I'm going to be.
All right, once more onto the breach. Let's go. Let's start with his early life. Although we're not going to devote a lot of time to how he got the way he is, because on the one hand, there's not much out there information-wise in that regard. And on the other hand, studying Grossman's early life is tricky because much of what we know comes from Grossman himself. And as I came to learn over the course of my research, Dave Grossman can't be your only source on anything. Everything he says or writes needs to be taken with massive grains of salt because all of it is an intractable mess of bad faith arguments, outright misinformation and falsehoods, and self-serving bullshit. So I will do the best I can. With all that in mind, Dave Grossman was born in Frankfurt, Germany on August the 23rd, 1956. His father worked in security, at one point serving as a police officer in Cheyenne, Wyoming, followed by a career as a security officer for Boeing, during which time the Grossman family moved around a lot. Dave dropped out of high school when he was 17, and at one point reportedly took a job working in a Nebraska oil field before enlisting in the United States Army in 1974, initially training as a paratrooper. Over the next 2 decades, he rose up the ranks as an Army officer, eventually becoming company commander of the 7th Light Infantry Division stationed at Fort Ord, California in 1986. Along the way, he also trained as an Army Ranger. However, it's important to know that he never served as a Ranger, nor did he ever see combat. And so keep those points in the back of your mind because they're going to be relevant for a bunch of what we're talking about. The fact that this guy has no combat experience.
Well, you know what they say: if you can't do, teach.
Oh, snap.
While in the military, Grossman also advanced his education, earning his associate's degree in 1977 from Fayetteville State University and a bachelor's degree from Columbus College in 1984. In 1988, he earned an opportunity that would shape much of the rest of his professional life. He successfully secured a position as a rotating faculty member at the United States Military Academy at West Point. However, I want to point out that a rotating faculty position, which is a term position, is different from an academy professor at West Point, which is a full-time faculty position that requires a PhD, which Grossman obviously didn't have. Now, this might sound like me splitting hairs, but this is going to be a really important distinction when it comes to the ways Grossman presents his academic credentials, because people are going to give the impression that he's one type of professor when he's not.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Kevin. I just want to say, just get out ahead of this. Nothing is more disgusting to me than misrepresenting your credentials in a public forum, especially if you're presenting yourself as an expert on something like some sort of educational topic or matters of the law. Whatever is just disgusting, and I don't approve.
Somehow I feel seen by that.
Oh, hey, real quick. I hope you don't mind me taking a couple minutes to do this. Andy, I actually never started investing. And I didn't put enough in my 401k. So if we could talk about that after the podcast, then you could, hook me up with some.
Yeah, I'll definitely give you some financial advice, some medical advice. Mm-hmm. For both of them, it's actually just invest in Scandal Coin. But yeah, we'll talk more.
And Kevin, Dr. Kevin, that is, I feel like I need a kidney transplant. Can you help me with that?
I'll hook you up. Yeah, we'll talk off mic about that.
Cool.
Never you want.
We're getting all sorts of needs met on this podcast.
All right. Where was I? So a part of this rotating faculty program, the military covered Dave's graduate school education, and he enrolled at the University of Texas at Austin, where they sent him to study psychology. Now, Grossman, who had no background in psychology up to that point, later recalled the field of study really didn't matter to him so long as he got the West Point appointment, explaining to Joshua Eels of Men's Journal in 2017, quote, "What West Point does is it selects people as professors, then sends them to grad school en route. I would have studied underwater basket weaving if it got me to West Point," end quote. Grossman earned his master's in education and counseling psychology in 1990. While at Texas, he worked as a graduate instructor and interned as a counselor at Round Rock Junior High School in Austin, Texas from 1989 to 1990. From what I've been able to gather, this internship marks the extent of his practical counseling experience, and as far as I can tell, to this day, he is not a certified mental health professional of any kind, which will also be relevant when it comes to how Grossman presents himself. Now, part of Grossman's program at West Point required enrollees to teach classes at the United States Military Academy, which he did after he finished his master's degree, teaching psychology in the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership from 1990 to 1993. Unfortunately, I have no idea what kinds of classes he taught. Although if it's anything like my experience teaching in graduate school, it was probably lower level undergraduate classes such as Intro to Psychology, but I can't be sure about that. But I just thought I'd point that out, given my own experience in that kind of field. According to his CV, which appeared for years on his website. And, CV is, for those unfamiliar, is basically it's like academia's version of a resume. It's like a list of all of your fellowships, all of your public engagement, all of your publications, all those things go in your CV. According to his CV, he also published no meaningful scholarly work during this time. In fact, until the mid-1990s, with the exception of a stint co-editing something called the Maneuver Warfare Symposium newsletter at West Point, the only publication to his name he felt the need to cite on his vita was an op-ed in the May 1984 issue of the military magazine Army, in which he recounted a debate he witnessed between several soldiers and the Army chaplain over the morality of killing POWs. And I read this article. It's largely a humble brag that Grossman wants his peers to know that he holds the very bold stance that we shouldn't murder POWs, which is a really, really interesting contrast given what he would later say when police officers murder people in custody. But we'll get to that later. It's literally just him saying that, like, oh, these people in my unit, these soldiers in my unit, were complaining that they ever encountered a POW. They might, given the situation, shoot the POW rather than bring them in. And they get into a debate with a chaplain, and Grossman basically says something along the lines of, if you did that under my watch, I'd kill you myself. It's basically him just saying to his Army peers that, like, I would not allow for that stuff. That's all it is. It's like, it doesn't add to any kind of discourse.
Well, what does remain consistent is maybe he's just looking for any excuse to kill someone. POWs, people out in the street, my own people. I just love killing.
So if I can sort of repeat back to you what I heard, Kev, was what he was saying was if one of his men threatened to shoot a prisoner of war, he would shoot the person who was threatening to shoot that person?
Pretty much, yeah. So he complains, he goes on this whole complaint.
And hey, you know what? No, I hate to cut you off, but hey, that Hitler guy, he's pretty bad. Someone should stop him, What a fucking hero. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to talk about because you think that you would need to say that. But yeah, he just mostly to complain how, in his words, immoral a lot of the enlisted men are, is basically all he's trying to say. So Grossman completed his teaching tour in 1993. And to this day, he still describes himself as a former psychology professor at West Point, which I, again, as a failed academic, I feel is on par with me saying that I'm a former history professor at a state university, despite my only academic contributions during that time being teaching 200-level history courses and writing some god-awful papers in my graduate courses. And you're going to see throughout the courses, again, as a bitter, failed academic that I am, I'm not terribly impressed by Dave Grossman's academic credentials. And we'll talk about that a lot. In any case, he parlayed his term at West Point into a faculty position at Arkansas State University, where he lists on his CV that he was the professor and chair of the Department of Military Science, which, as far as I can tell, is a fancy way of saying he ran the university's ROTC program from 1994 to 1998. He also did some adjunct teaching for Arkansas State University's Department of Psychology and Counseling. And again, if it's anything like when I was an adjunct, he's probably teaching lower level psychology classes. Again, I don't know because he doesn't list any of them on his resume, but he's probably teaching not really deep theory. It's like intro stuff. While at ASU, Grossman put together his first major publication, a book titled On Killing, The Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society, which Grossman published in 1995 through the popular press Little, Brown and Company. On Killing proved to be Grossman's most influential work, and as we'll learn, it was the book that catapulted him from obscure adjunct professor into a national figure and facilitated his eventual rise to one of the most dominant voices training America's police. And relevant to this show, it also became the foundation for his moral crusade against video games. In fact, it's not a stretch to say that On Killing helped shape the entire violent video game conversation over the past quarter century. Its influence looms pretty large. So with that in mind, for the next part of the episode, we're going to take a deep dive into this book, into On Killing, and we'll examine its arguments and how Grossman came to his conclusions. We're going to kind of talk about this in detail in the next couple of episodes. And then later, we'll talk about his intellectual influences, as well as the book's academic and popular reception. And without giving too much away, we'll also learn how a lot of what we think about violent video games was based on a deeply flawed book, based on research that was, to say the least, not great. So how do we feel about taking a deep dive into a book? I imagine that a kind of academic book club was not exactly what you all signed up for 2 years ago.
Oh, Kevin, come on. I don't know. That sounds kind of sus. Like you're telling me first, this is all based on a book that is kind of suspect. Next, you're going to tell me what? Christopher Columbus didn't discover America? Where do you get off?
I feel like this is kind of the same question as you asked us previously. How do you feel about talking about Dave Grossman? How do you feel about deep diving into this book? Do I have a choice? It's this or leave the podcast. I mean, I could go make lunch.
I agreed to be, on this podcast because I know how to talk. You never asked us if we know how to read. And so, no, I am not comfortable taking it.
Andy, you have the dulcet tones of a radio host. So that's why I think you're on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, that's okay. It's my job to subject myself to these things. Throughout the course of analyzing and researching this book, I had to keep reminding myself that I could literally be doing anything else. I did this to myself. So here we go. I suffered through this book, so you don't have to. All right, so let's get into it. In On Killing, Grossman argues that for the majority of American military history, the U.S. Army had a real big problem. Soldiers just wouldn't kill people.
Lazy layabouts.
Yeah. So, for example, the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, Grossman observes that as many as 90% of the guns recovered after the battle were still loaded, and some had even been loaded multiple times. Skipping ahead, during World War II, Grossman argues that American military officials learned to their horror that as many as 80 to 85% of riflemen wouldn't fire their guns at all. This shocking statistic led Grossman to conclude that American soldiers had a natural aversion to killing and would go to great lengths not to take another life, even among people whom they've been trained to view as an enemy. If you're already starting to see cracks in this line of reasoning, don't worry. Hold on to that. We're going to dissect this. As Grossman explained early in the book, quote, "Why did these men fail to fire? As I examined this question and studied the process of killing in combat from the standpoints of a historian, a psychologist, and a soldier." Side note, we'll get back to Grossman's claims that he's an historian in a little bit. I began to realize that there was one major factor that was missing from the common understanding of killing in combat. A factor that answers this question and more. That missing factor is the simple and demonstrable fact that there was within most men an intense resistance to killing their fellow man, a resistance so strong that, in many circumstances, soldiers on the battlefield will die before they can overcome it, end quote. Any thoughts about that?
So I believe you for sure that this is, his paper is probably poorly researched and should not be taken at face value as a true understanding of humanity. I do like to believe that the average person, would find it very hard to take a life. Or at least what I've always heard about how the military has to other, whoever it is you're going to be fighting against to overcome that aversion. Seems I can buy that there's some element of truth to what he's talking about.
So this strikes me as somebody who themselves wants to kill and wants to come up with justifications for killing, and then has a killing product and needs to figure out who his target demographic is. Like, let's see, wait a minute. Who out there is having trouble killing? You know what? Soldiers. Hey, do you have a problem killing? Why, yes, I do. Well, I've got just the thing for you. It's this book called On Killing.
Generally speaking, we're trying not to kill each other or try not to kill people. If, I've known people who've, accidentally killed someone and it ruined their life. And I just wouldn't think that anybody wants to do that. So
yeah, soldiers, they just don't kill people. They're just not killing enough people. However, all was not lost for the military-industrial complex, because Grossman noted that this trend of presumably thousands upon thousands of soldiers just pointing their guns and just making bang and pew-pew noises began to change in the years following the Second World War. According to Grossman, observers noted that by the Korean War in the 1950s, the firing rates among Army riflemen had jumped from 15 to 20% to 55%. And by the Vietnam War, the Army had a near 100% firing rate among its infantry. He says roughly between 90 and 95% are now firing their weapons. And we'll explore those stats in a bit. We'll talk about that eventually. In light of this, the bulk of the rest of On Killing explores two key questions. First, what factors determine whether a soldier kills someone? And second, How did the Army's firing rate go from 15 to 20% in World War II to 90 to 95% by Vietnam, roughly 20 years later? And before we get into that, I think I have another thing I'd like to say. Get over here.
Get
All
over
right.
here.
So here we go. And that just, kind of makes me think you have the military's kill rate going up. Hasn't productivity been going up in American industry overall for the last 60 years? And who's been making the profit of that? It's been concentrating at the top. So I'm sure Dave Grossman also will go on to say, the average private kills 2.5 more people per hour than he used to in the 60s, but it's the generals who are making it all. Anyway,
can I piggyback onto that?
Go for it.
So Kevin, you mentioned two stats. What percentage in what year to what percentage in 1 year?
All right, so it's 15 to 20% U.S. infantry firing rate during World War II, and this jumps up to 55% by Korea. And then by Vietnam, he says it's 90 to 95% are firing now. It's not even killing percentages. He's talking about people firing their guns in the first place.
And you know what we can attribute that to? All of the video games they were playing between 1945 to 1974.
Comic books.
Oh my god!
Comic books were actually turning them into commies.
No. There were guns in the books. If you turn the pages, you can find them.
All right. So I heard somebody ask that I get over there. So
Get over here or there.
Andy's in our living room right now. Okay, go on.
Pokemon or prescription drug? Benacar.
Say it again.
Benacar.
Okay, let me set you up real fast. Who's that Pokemon? It's
Benacar. Or is it? Or does your doctor look at you and say, it looks to me like you need Benacar right away.
Ask your doctor if Benacar is right for you.
I want to say drug. I think I'm gonna go drug because Bena, good, and car, meaning
car.
Yeah, exactly.
Like vroom. Yeah, no.
We love
good
those.
cars. Yeah.
All right, so we've got one vote for prescription drug. Kevin, Kate, care to hazard a guess?
I'm gonna say Pokemon, just because I haven't heard Benacar in either case. I hear what you're saying, like Phil, about like Bena meaning good tends to precede drugs, but I don't know Benacar.
All right.
I'm thinking, like, when I hear Benacar, I think of that prefix. I think of like Benadryl. Although Benadryl, if you think about it, could be a Pokemon as well. Maybe even an evolved form of Benacar. I'm gonna again say, like, my knowledge of Pokemon is pretty much starts to fizzle out around Gen 3. And so I'm gonna also say this is a Pokemon.
All right, and the answer is Benacar is a prescription drug used to treat high blood pressure in adults and children at least 6 years old.
Oh, cars and cardio.
Oh, that makes sense. Olmesartan is the generic name.
Okay, that's a Pokemon.
Sartan! Olmesartan!
Zoltan used Heart Attack. It was super effective.
All right. Through the middle of the book, Grossman details a bunch of factors involved in whether a person can engage in the destructive act in combat. By his estimation, this mostly involves a combination of how well a person can connect to a target on a human level. For example, it's much easier for a person performing a bombing run while flying thousands of feet in the air to kill other people versus, strangling someone with their bare hands because of the degree of distance between the aggressor and target. He also notes the influence of authority figures as well as the group dynamics of a soldier relative to their unit. So, for example, a soldier is more likely to kill under orders and are more inclined to take part in killing if their fellow soldiers are doing it as well. And it's a lot of material that I have no expertise in. I would not pretend to be an expert in any of this stuff on account account of not having any background in psychology. And while Grossman has neither much psychology experience outside of a classroom nor any firsthand combat experience, I'm willing to look the other way in his observations in this regard. Although, if we have psychologists listening, I would love to hear your insights on this. scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. The more interesting question, and the one that's more important for understanding Grossman's future crusade against video games, is how he believed the Army convinced a generation of young soldiers to overcome their aversion to taking other people's lives. According to Grossman, between World War II and Vietnam, the U.S. Army completely revamped the way it trained soldiers. This new method involved a regimen focused on dehumanizing the enemy and psychologically conditioning soldiers to kill on command without hesitation. At the heart of this training program is something Grossman called operant conditioning. Grossman claimed that in the years following 1945, that soldiers were regularly subjected to live-fire training exercises designed to simulate real combat situations where they fired at human-shaped targets. This was in contrast to earlier training methods, which according to Grossman primarily involved stationary firing at round bullseye targets. So, this, you see those, like, if you've ever been on a shooting range, like the paper targets with a person shaped on there, according to him before that, they were using like bullseyes that didn't look like people. I cannot comment on whether or not that's accurate. In addition, the soldiers also received positive feedback for good performance in the forms of awards like marksmanship medals and praise from their superiors, and negative feedback for poor performance, such as retraining, peer pressure, and failure to pass. This, Grossman argues, conditioned soldiers over time to associate good performance during the simulations with rewards. How like you train a dog, except instead of awarding sausages, it's medals, and instead of learning how to shake paws, it's killing people. According to Grossman, this repeated process eventually conditioned soldiers to reflexively fire on command, as well as perceive their enemies on the battlefield as just faceless targets rather than human beings. It was this process that Grossman argues allowed the Army to psychologically manipulate soldiers to overcome their natural aversion to killing. As Grossman explains, quote, basically the soldier has rehearsed the process so many times that when he does kill in combat, he is able to, at one level, deny to himself that he's actually killing another human being. This careful rehearsal and realistic mimicry of the act of killing permit the soldier to convince himself that he only engaged another target, end quote. Says, all our soldiers are just good boys and they shoot people and then you get a pat in the head. And it's all okay. It's all super cool. Grossman acknowledges that while these new training techniques increased the firing rate of the Vietnam-era soldier compared to his World War II counterpart, it came at a cost. The psychological well-being of these soldiers, who then had to grapple with the moral and emotional ramifications of killing other people, manifesting in such ways as long-term mental health issues, substance misuse, and PTSD, as returning veterans struggled to come to terms with what the Army conditioned them to do. So what do we think about this so far? How's everybody doing?
I feel like I have also heard of soldiers returning from World War II with varying degrees of PTSD. I guess I don't know that does contain any element of regret for things that they had to do, but I'm sort of feeling that like that's a big hole in his argument, that it was not until the Vietnam era that soldiers started to come home and regret anything that they had to do.
I remember seeing early footage from World War One, not even World War II, Andy, of people coming back from the war, and they didn't know what to do with these men. They thought they were sometimes they thought they were faking some sort of mental illness so they didn't have to go back into the military, or they just, whatever. They were not faking, needless to say. But I remember distinctly there was footage of a guy who you just had to say the word bomb, and he would hit the ground and crawl under the nearest piece of furniture. A chair, a table, whatever. That was just his immediate response. And there was another person who they didn't know what happened to him, but there was an admiral's helmet they would hold in front of him, and he would get hysterical. Like he'd crawl back and his hands were shaking and stuff. Like he just couldn't do something. Just the visual of an admiral's helmet, and they were like, we don't know what happened, but he essentially, both of these men were traumatized, and these were very visible effects of being traumatized. And like I said, this was from World War One, which you could easily expect such traumatizing experiences to happen. So to say that nobody was traumatized before Vietnam, which is that, Kevin, is that what this guy's trying to say? Like basically everybody came home and they were fine because they were men were men, and
yeah, exactly.
Men were strong and nobody got hurt and no one got upset. And no, that's bullshit. That's my feeling.
he's playing into, I think, a fallacy about the memory of World War II versus later wars. There's a fascinating book that came out a number of years ago called The Warrior Image. And just as a full disclosure, I actually wrote a review of this that got published somewhere. I think it was in the Maryland Historical Review. But it was basically talking about the evolution of the perception of the American soldier from World War II up through Vietnam, and how in World War II, the expectation of the culture was basically they went off, they fought, they did their duty, and they came home and they just reintegrated back into society. You didn't need to worry about them. They were fine. They were tough. They just went back and did their thing. But that by Vietnam, the large perception of the American soldier is that he'd been victimized and traumatized by the experience he was in. So a lot of the perception, particularly like groups like Vietnam Veterans Against the War and a lot of people who tried to largely talk about the ways that soldiers had been victimized by the war, and like talking about more things like PTSD. And you could see that a lot in like popular culture. Think of like Rambo, the guy who comes back from the war and like he can't adjust and he can't come back into society. And then I think that Grossman is playing into this kind of fallacy that, like, again, this sort of popular perception that World War II soldiers just kind of did their thing and they came home and were fine. And that's not true. And as you pointed out, Kate, like there was, shell shock, battle fatigue, what they called it. It's like what we'd call now. Yeah, there's a very famous painting by a warrior named Thomas Lee that was from 1944 called The 2,000-Yard Stare. It's a depiction of a soldier just dead staring and like kind of staring through them, and the idea of talking about the psychological impact that the war had on them. And so, yeah, I think that you all make good points here that like it's in a certain respect ignoring that those things happened during previous wars. And it's like Grossman basically saying this is why the Vietnam soldier was different than World War II soldier. And that was a lot of conversation and popular understanding, is why was the Vietnam soldier worse than the World War II soldier? And that's not necessarily true. It's just the way the perceptions of what war did to them changed in the popular culture. The popular perception of the soldier changes over time. It's different in World War II relative to Vietnam. And some people get the misconception, I think, that it meant that the soldier for Vietnam came back different than a World War II soldier. They weren't able to reintegrate in society as easily. And it's more that people are more cognizant of the psychological toll of war.
And so is the thought that soldiers just generally were more able to reintegrate back into society when they came back from World War II versus when they came back from Vietnam?
No, they weren't. They weren't any more able to do that. They were impacted by some of the similar things, but we just don't talk about it relative to World War II.
And that's what your pal, Mr. Grossman, was saying?
Grossman is leaning to the idea of PTSD being a thing that happened to the Vietnam soldier. The reason he's arguing is because they were conditioned to kill in a different way that the soldiers were. That's the central argument of this whole thing, is that they changed the way they were able to get soldiers to fire their guns because they changed to these new training techniques. And that then had a psychological toll on the soldier. They got these higher firing rates, but it came at this cost. That's what he's trying to say. Now, with all this talk of discarded muskets, firing rates, and shooting human-shaped paper targets for praise, you might be rightfully asking yourself, what does any of this have to do with video games? And to answer that, I direct you to the final section of On Killing, where Grossman explores the question of the impact of operant conditioning on American civilian life. Titled Killing in America, What Are We Doing to Our Children? Grossman paints a grim picture of 1990s America, which he argues is in the grips of what he calls a virus of violence. Now we're getting into the good shit here. This is the Scandals Games wheelhouse right here.
Oh, I thought he was going to complain that kids today are little sissies who are no good at killing people, not like the kids during the World War II. No, those kids knew how to kill a Nazi. Modern kids, I don't trust him.
Well, he says that the World War II generation weren't good at killing Nazis because they didn't want to shoot at them.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm all mixed up now.
So Grossman proclaims that as of his writing, America's in the midst of a terrifying wave of violent crime, one that has been escalating over the last few decades into a full-blown crisis. Then stop me if any of this sounds familiar that we covered on this show. As proof, he argues that aggravated assault rates have been skyrocketing since the 1950s, and that the murder rate among teen boys between 1985 and 1991 went up a whopping 154%. And put a pin in that, we'll get back to that. In fact, he warns that both the assault and the murder rates would be even worse were it not for a combination of improved emergency medical techniques developed over the past half century, and America's ballooning incarceration rate, taking all those would-be murderers off the streets. So, thanks, prisons?
Yeah, thank God murder doesn't occur in prisons.
So what does Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman think is the cause for this unstoppable tide of violence? Maybe it's racial prejudice as an increasingly militarized police force grew to treat low-income communities, and especially communities of color, as insurgents rather than citizens. Maybe it's deindustrialization, where corporations outsource American manufacturing to the global south so they can undercut unions and exploit workers in places with minimal workplace protections. Or maybe it's a significant slashing of government programs, which put greater pressure on the middle and lower class families to make ends meet, while the runaway excesses of capitalism consolidated wealth among an oligarchy of the ultra-rich. It ain't any of that shit, it's video games. Of course it's video games. What else would it be but video games that's causing all of this?
Well, the podcast is not called Scandalous Guys Who Write About War. So, yeah.
Scandalous access to guns.
So yeah, it's according to Dave, things are getting more violent because of those nasty, violent video games. The last section is an extended diatribe against the corrupting influences of the media, wherein Grossman warns that the techniques employed by the U.S. Army to turn its soldiers into automatic killing machines is now going on en masse in America's movie theaters, video arcades, and living rooms. He sums up the problem in a passage that would become a persistent talking point of Grossman and his supporters that is still repeated to this day. Quote, in Vietnam, a systematic process of desensitization, conditioning, and training increased the individual firing rate from a World War II baseline of 15 to 20% to an all-time high of up to 95%. Today, a similar process of systematic desensitization, conditioning, and vicarious learning is unleashing an epidemic, a virus of violence in America. The same tools that more than quadrupled the firing rate in Vietnam are now in widespread use among our civilian population. Military personnel are just beginning to understand and accept what they've been doing to themselves and their men. If we have reservations about the military's use of these mechanisms to ensure the survival and success of our soldiers in combat, then how much more so should we be concerned about the indiscriminate application of the same processes to our nation's children? End quote. Just skipping ahead, the argument he posited in 1995, his argument today in 2023 is virtually unchanged. He feels roughly the exact same way about this today as he did when he wrote this in the 90s. So Grossman explains that movies and television shows that depict explicit violence desensitize young people to violence and even condition them to view violence positively. He targets slasher films in particular. We're getting into your wheelhouse, Kate, for this. He targets slasher films in particular. He argues how movies like the Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Street series encourage the viewer to connect with and even root for the villain as they kill victims in gruesome and increasingly creative ways.
Has he even seen a slasher movie? No, sorry.
I
Bullshit.
feel like
no one's rooting for Freddy. I'm sorry. If they are, it's ironically. Like, no.
I feel like Dave Grossman might like the movie This Film Is Not Yet Rated, which is a documentary about...
I've seen that one. That's a good one.
About
the
MPAA rating system. And in it, they talk about how violence is so much more acceptable in American society
than sexuality.
Than sex. Yeah, that...
More specifically, female sexuality, feminine sexuality. Sorry, go on, Andy. I feel like I'm interrupting you.
But yeah, that, like, you know, that so many things will automatically get you an X rating if they're sexual in nature, but you can show really violent stuff and get by with an R rating, or even nowadays, like if you don't have blood, a PG-13 rating. So I don't think there's zero merit to what Grossman is talking about as far as, like, you know, our society's predilection toward glorifying violence, but I think he's maybe you know, drawing the wrong conclusions from it.
Right. So, Andy, can I ask you to restate, please? I think Dave Grossman's right. Can you say that back? No.
I agree that American society you
really don't have to do any of what I just said. You could bail anytime.
I'm a real lawyer. That's
no, I was not trying to pull you into doing something you do. I'm sorry. I actually thought you were going to go, no. So, thank you for playing along. But, I have seen that documentary also. And I recall, like, part of it was, yeah, you're right. Like, there's, like, violence up and down the street. Who cares? But it's sexuality is where you get the R ratings. I remember distinctly they were talking about one of the scary movie parodies. There, a woman gets a breast implant stabbed out of her breast, and it's like she gets violently, pulled down to the ground, and someone stabs her in the chest and pulls out the breast implant, and that's the joke, right? But she's dying, and that was okay. That got a PG-13. And then there was another movie where a woman is sexually happy on screen, and that got an R rating because of that. And it was like, the barometer of what is and is not okay is all measured by who is and is not judging it. And in the case of this film is not yet rated, what, Andy, it was a bunch of stodgy old white guys, right?
Yeah, to my recollection.
Yeah, everybody go watch that movie. It's really good.
Get over here.
All right, everybody. Is this a Pokemon or a prescription drug? Celebi.
Can I get the country of origin, please?
Well, I mean, if it's a Pokemon, then its country of origin would be Japan. If it's a medicine, then it would be another
With a
place,
French
maybe.
toast nose. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, if it were a medicine, then it would be Lansdowne, Pennsylvania. You're doing a really good job on these, by the way, Andy.
Oh,
These are fun.
well, thank you. So any guesses?
I feel like this is a leaf type Pokemon, like a little nymph. I just picture somebody with little wings. So I'm going to say Pokemon.
All right, we have one vote for Pokemon.
I think I've heard both halves of this name as drugs, like Celebrex and Kelby or Kelby, but both of them together, Celebi, does sound like a Pokemon. Going with Pokemon.
All right, 2 votes for Pokemon. Kevin.
I deliberately went last here because I think I've been pretty vocal about the fact that Gen 2 is my favorite Pokemon generation, and Celebi is the legendary from Gen 2.
Yes. So you're all right. Celebi is a Pokemon. It is a grass psychic type Pokemon that, as Kevin said, originated in Generation 2. It was, after Mew, the second Pokemon that was not obtainable within the game. You had to go to a special event. In the US, for example, they were often maybe at like a Toys R Us or something, and there they would like trade you a Celebi. Yes, that's the story of Celebi.
Yeah, I remember when years ago I bought my copy of Pokemon Gold. I got it on eBay back before the retro game market got out of control, and so I bought it for like $25 or whatever. And I'll never forget the good citizen from whom I bought this copy of Gold had Celebi on it. And
nice.
I remember doing, and at this point, unfortunately, that Celebi is long gone because the battery died on that, and so I lost the save because that's what happens with Gen 2. I remember doing the item duplication glitch because there was a glitch in Gen 2 where if you moved Pokemon into a box, and you know when you do to change a box in those early generation games, the game saves. So it's like you're changing box, the game is going to save. If you turn the system off at just the right time while it's putting the saving do not turn the system off message and restart your system, you can then boot up the game and go into both of those boxes you were changing to, and the Pokemon will appear in both. And so this became a way to duplicate Pokemon. So I remember giving my Celebi a Master Ball and moving it between boxes to duplicate it so that I had 2 Celebi with a Master Ball. And you can do as many Pokemon as you wanted to like that. And of course, those Pokemon are long gone because I didn't transfer them right because the battery died and all that. But that's my personal experience with Celebi.
We can save them.
Well, it makes sense that you did that with Celebi because Celebi is called the time travel Pokemon. So
It looks like a sentient fennel, right? Am I wrong?
more to me like kind of an onion bulb. Although I don't know what a fennel looks like. So
Yeah,
maybe.
no, I'm right. I mean, you're also right. We're both right.
So thanks again, Andy. This is fantastic. I really do appreciate these Pokemon-related interludes. They are really a breath of fresh air when it comes to dealing with a tough topic like Dacros. And I think this is actually a really good place to stop for now. And so I hope you'll tune in next time when we'll take a closer look at Dave's alleged virus of violence. And we'll see if he knows what he's talking about when it comes to, video games, movies, violent crime, anything he's talking about here. And I hope you'll tune in for that next time. And that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Octum Seek by Killology via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. With a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Phil Thomas.
I'm Andy Hunter.
I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.